All right, everyone. Welcome to our panel about Bitcoin urbanism with speakers Austin Tunnell and Kelly Lannan. Kelly, we haven't heard from you. You're the kind of person that has one leg in the real estate world and another leg in the Bitcoin world. Could you tell the audience a little bit about you?
Sure. So based on Austin's presentation, I would be called the evil spreadsheet developer. I build your cheap stick houses. No, I'm just kidding. So I come from a home building family. My dad's been in the business for about 40 years. I started working the job sites as soon as I could get grounded. And I've basically been doing it ever since. So my, I guess, Bitcoin and real estate origin story is a little bit different. So I grew up literally working job sites grounded and kind of stumbled across Bitcoin, I guess, in 2016, joined a real estate Bitcoin related group. And I did a trip as an adult to the West Village in New York City. And I was absolutely floored because I've never seen anything like it in my life. And when I got home, I was a bit depressed. And I was like, you know what? What is it about a place like the West Village? And why doesn't my neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona look like this? So I went down that very deep rabbit hole. And in conjunction with Bitcoin, it was kind of like, well, if a lot of the things that I complain about in my daily life are proximate causes to how we got here, what is the ultimate cause? And in my summation, it was basically, well, fiat money and central banking and credit itself is necessarily the culprit, because without that, none of what I do is literally possible. It can't be afforded. The time that it takes can't be taken. So in that sense, Bitcoin urbanism and the way that I kind of write about it is the study of the built environment as it is today versus how it could be on a sound monetary policy.
Yeah, I love that. That makes a lot of sense. And so, we're all familiar with like the, especially anyone who does anything international, with like how kind of broken the financial system is, like dealing with things like KYC and verification and like just settlement stuff that doesn't even really work. It's all kind of like taped together and just very dysfunctional as soon as you see how functional and performant Bitcoin is. So much leakage of energy. So do you see the current state of the built world in the U.S. the same way? Like, would you call it like fiat architecture? Like, do we have central planning, or is that too much, too starkly put?
No, but it's a central planning. It's definitely central planning, and I make jokes about it being central planning, but it's not the central planning that you would think of coming from the highest possible location. It's central planning that the highest possible location allows localities to do, if that makes sense. So let's say, for example, the Supreme Court allows zoning. That's where it comes from. But they allow zoning at the local level. So what happens over time, and what has happened over time, is that different ways of zoning have essentially ossified and grown over the last 100 or so years. So we have a situation where they're allowed to do it, and they essentially copy each other. The cities copy each other and how effective their zoning is. Austin had made a comment in his presentation about the underlying basis and reason for zoning itself was quite literally racist, to keep different races apart or to quote unquote keep the poors away. So all of those things over time got struck down in the court system. And what they did was they basically just moved the goalpost, which allowed them to accomplish their original intent. Now, that's how it started. What it is today is not that. It's a total monster that has nothing to do with class or race. It's just a form of control, right? The central planning is not, do we need houses here, but what will we allow that will fit our existing infrastructure so that we don't have to essentially upgrade it or pay for it. So that leads into, okay, well, what infrastructure do we have then? And the answer is really old infrastructure. It was originally designed 100 years ago for certain capacities to do certain things. And when you have central banking and fiat money in general with inflation, all of that does is just get more expensive over time. So you're not necessarily building new capacity unless you absolutely have to. And when you do have to build new capacity, you dump that cost onto developers building new homes, right? So there's a concept called an impact fee, where if you wanted to build a new subdivision, not necessarily in the middle of the city, it could be on the outskirts of the city, they take what's called an impact fee and they use that money to essentially improve, take care of, or upsize the existing infrastructure. So you get into a situation where you only have infrastructure because somebody is borrowing money to give to the city, if the city's not borrowing it themselves directly, to maintain just what exists today. Very rarely does new roads or highways get built based on certain taxes, right? A lot of times it's all debt-based. So you're in a situation where everything functions and only functions because there is some sort of debt mechanism that can basically pay for it.
So you're saying there's a big crisis that's baked into the pie already?
Yeah, absolutely. And Austin had touched on this, that the I think it's the American Society of Engineers, Civil Engineers, basically put out a study that says, yeah, it's really bad. Not like bad, really bad.
There's someone in our Oklahoma City department, am I on video?
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll say their name. But basically it says, like, if you knew what the bridges were like, you wouldn't drive on them.
Yeah. So,
yikes.
And all of these things were built at some time. Bridges especially are usually quite old. So they were built with wealth at the time of construction. They weren't built with debt necessarily. So we've come to a place at Strong Towns describes this as basically the suburban Ponzi, where you have extracted all of the existing wealth to pay for basically grand expansion in the suburbs, but there's no financial productivity to take care of the existing infrastructure. You can only grow to take care of what is already old and falling apart. So, in that case, you start with central planning at the local level that ends up being just a mess of debt for infrastructure that can't be paid for unless you keep expanding, but it's quite literally a Ponzi scheme because you can't afford to expand anyways.
So yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking like they say, like, never let a good crisis go to waste. Like, is there a silver lining here? Like, is there, if we are gonna just inevitably have this big infrastructure real estate crisis, and if, on the other hand, if what we all believe is true, that Bitcoin is going to keep marching forward and kind of like our collective ability to kind of, make investments and make long-term plans keeps growing, is there an opportunity here? Like, I mean, I'm talking longer term. I'm not talking about, this year or next year, but kind of like over the next few decades. What are your thoughts?
Guys, so Bitcoin Standard is fresh on my mind. And it was really interesting because he was talking about the Dark Ages, when they started actually clipping their coins and stuff like that. Going to the Dark Age, what brought things out of the Dark Age was actually the city-states of the Renaissance, and he used Florence and Venice as an example. And what did they do? They actually created sound money first, and then created these wonderful cities that became hubs of innovation and culture. And that's actually how I think about it. Like, in some ways, I don't mean Dark Ages doesn't have to mean zombie apocalypse, right? It can just mean kind of what we're talking about in a lot of ways. And I do think things are going to have to get a little bit worse in a lot of ways because that's going to force different decisions. But that's where I get a lot of the hope is people can create these little enclaves of wonderful places that are responsible and attract like culture creators and centers of innovation, and then really grow outward from that is one of the things that I thought about when I was reading the book.
Kelly, what's your take?
My thought is that when you have essentially centralized forms of credit, and when those things start to fall apart and you have something that can replace it, what it allows is a very localist response because you know that there's to put it bluntly, there's no credit coming to save you, right? There's no credit from Washington, D.C. that's going to end up in Scottsdale or in Austin or in Oklahoma. So you have the ability to respond locally. You have theoretically the best money ever made in order to do that. The most important part is that people have begun to question how the math works. So we know that, essentially from studying Bitcoin, that fiat money solved a problem at the time. Did it cause a lot more problems in response? Absolutely. But we're at a place now where we understand, looking backwards with the information and the knowledge that we have, to put the pieces together and say, okay, this is how we got here, and this is how we're going to respond going forward. So real estate has always been local. It's always been about the neighborhoods, about the city, and then slowly moving block by block. I think that if such a credit crisis occurs, even hyperinflation, where the U.S. dollar is destroyed or something needs to replace it, that people will respond and fix things locally. Because even if you need to survive with shelter or these other services, like, you're just going to do it. There's nobody that's going to try and, they can try and stop you, but they also need these things too. So I think it's a complex issue and topic. However, from a local perspective, it can be solved, and I believe that's how it will be solved.
Yeah, and also, they say money talks, and maybe at some point our money is going to start talking. I'm thinking about in the short term, what's already seems to be happening. I'm following the local news here a bit in Austin. Is that there's already some changes in the lot sizes, and it's funny, and I'm a lot less deep into this world, and so I'm curious what your take is. It's funny to me that even a kind of a small tremor in the real estate market seems to be all of a sudden facilitating these big rule changes, where all of a sudden developers can start doing things that maybe they weren't allowed to do for decades. Is that something, do you agree? Are there already some cracks, and are we seeing some changes in new things that are becoming possible?
Go ahead.
Just, Oklahoma City, the technical term is 97% of Oklahoma City is zoned R1. It's probably similar for Austin or some. R1 basically meaning large lots, single family detached, large setbacks, large side setbacks, and basically super, super low density. And that's mandated by law. And so what you're seeing is, as with a lot of the housing crisis, affordability crisis, cities are starting to realize, crap, we need more housing. So they're talking about things like allowing ADUs, things like garage apartments by right, having smaller lots where maybe you can put a fourplex instead of, quadplex, fourplex, or a duplex instead of just a single family detached houses on kind of any given lot. And those things are very helpful and valuable. They're kind of overlaying on the existing system. It's not groundbreaking, but I'd say it's a very positive step still in the right direction of being able to do different types of projects in existing lots.
Yeah, and on a national level, there are pushes all over the place to remove single-family zoning, just wholesale, just gone. Another important...
Can you clarify that? What does that mean, single-family zoning?
So a zoning classification like R1, like Austin was talking about, is being voted on by basically the local populace through their city councils to be removed. So that single-family classification for the purposes of zoning doesn't exist. So there's no... If I wanted to build a subdivision of homes, I could do it, or I could build more intense uses. So I could build duplexes, threeplexes, fourplexes, things like that. So there's no local requirement that I only build one house on a lot. So that's happened in, I believe, Portland, Minneapolis. There was a push recently in Phoenix. So that is happening. The other more, direct and effective approach has been removing what's called parking minimums. So this building that we're in today, the Littlefield building, could not exist today if you had to build it with the required parking minimums. It'd be one of those god-awful towers down the street where half of it, if you look at it, half of the building vertically is actually just a parking garage. And then the actual office is above that. That's the only way that you can build high rises today. So there's pushes all over the country. Phoenix, everywhere, to remove the parking minimums because people are understanding that, like, well, on a per unit basis, if it costs me $500,000 to build an apartment, that parking space and that, structure cost me maybe a tenth of the overall cost. It may cost me $50,000 because you have to use the entire parking structure and then just divide it by however many units you have. The biggest, newest thing that's going on is there's a paper that was published called the Constitutional Case to Overturn or basically to remove zoning, period. It was centered on single family and essentially the housing crisis, that there's not enough shelter for all the people who want it, and that their approach is basically like, well, originally when this was done in 1926, 1927, Euclid versus Ambler, that it was the policing power, and we don't necessarily think that that's a good law anymore. So that would be something. I would love to see that happen. That would bring in the missing middle housing and everything that you see, a lot of the stuff like what Austin does, and it would allow smaller developers to build smaller projects instead of having to upscale all the time in order just to stay in business.
Those are really encouraging developments. That's awesome, yeah, to see that it's already happening. I have a final question, and then I want to open it up for questions from the audience. I'm curious how you both feel about the education with regards to traditional architecture. Like, do you feel like, in the time that you've been involved in it, like, do you feel like more people are becoming aware of this? Is it still, just kind of under the radar for everyone? And what are some things that give you hope in terms of, these kind of conversations?
I have a ton of hope because as things kind of get bad a little bit, you have to dig and build a new foundation. But what happens is you start getting groups of people, together where you start recognizing, like, oh, that person shares those values. And I think there's just a growing number of people that are just open to all of this at different age groups, especially younger people. It's really kind of the 60 plus that are still kind of because they grew up a certain way. And I know there's older people in this room too. I just mean in my experience at the city council, the people that generally come to protest would be people a little bit older that have lived somewhere for 30 years, and it's understandable, I get it. But there's a lot of people out there doing great work and a lot of change in the culture about it.
Are young people excited about laying bricks?
They think they are until they go do it. It's hard work.
I imagine it's satisfying to see the results.
It is. It really is. To work on something beautiful and meaningful, yes, absolutely.
Kelly, what's your take on the educational side of things?
Well, I would have to say, in my opinion, because I absolutely hate modern architecture, is that the giant white pill of all of this is that when people, I guess in the 30 to 50 age range bracket, when they want to build their own home and the architect draws them essentially a modern monstrosity and they ask why they can't design something else, it's when they see the price tag of changing from something that's modern, which is basically a literal square with a few windows, and being shown something that's what we would consider traditionally beautiful architecture, and showing them what the cost per square foot goes from. It may go up 50 to 100%. And people realize that, oh, well, I only see all of this modern stuff because it is cheap, or it's because it's what people can afford to build. It's in my professional career, the attitude has changed to, it's like, well, it's only being built at modern, quote unquote, because that's all that can be built, not because people actually find it attractive or beautiful. So my white pill for that is that people are understanding that it's not being built because it's beautiful. It's not being built because it's desired. It's being built because it's what can be afforded. So people are starting to wonder why that is.
And so do you feel like more people are starting to become aware that there's even another world out there, or is that kind of just always been there because of Europe and stuff?
I mean, honestly, if I see the portal, the brick portal, one more time, I think that there will be even more hope in the world. And I'm not saying this just because Austin's project is great, and the fact that people unknowingly share the brick portal. If you guys remember from the first video, it's the big circle brick, right?
The moon door.
The moon door, yes. That photo just makes the rounds, and that people comment on it without knowing where it came from. They're not connected to real estate Twitter or Bitcoin Twitter or anything, just because I look. And it's fun to see. It's being posted like it's a European city, but it's like, wait a minute, this is in Oklahoma? We can do this, and we should.
Yeah,
we will.
Compelling alternative. You show the compelling alternative. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to have the language. You don't have to know about anything architecture development. You experience it, and you go, what is this?
Yeah,
and there's more and more places like
from
that to give
experience. Like,
examples.
I mean, I grew up in a brick house, and so like a kind of like mason. What do you call it again? The load-bearing masonry walls, just traditional brick house, and so it was coming like actually, walking around in the house that Austin built in Oklahoma. I remember it's like, oh, that feeling where like you just feel the sturdiness around you. And actually, this place has some of it too, where you can still feel it. And it's hard to explain, but once you've experienced it, it's really something.
I mean, you can go touch it. Just look at
goosebumps.
It's right there.
and to be clear, we're having to build stick frame too now. We're not only doing masonry now because of cost, and if we can't sell it,
Right.
we lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, nearly went out of business because of it. So we have to deal with incentives too. It's not like I said, but that's why it's exciting with the cultural shift, because as people start to understand, it enables people like us to actually do different things.
Absolutely. So let's open it up for a question from the audience. Anyone want to give it a go? Sure.
Thanks. So whenever this topic comes up, I find myself torn between I'm very simpatico with your aesthetic sense and the sort of things you want to build. But the examples from all urbanists end up being, beautiful European cities that, whether the buildings themselves or at least the layout of those cities, those were sort of baked in centuries ago when walkable wasn't a choice. Walkable was just the only thing. So it came up very organically. And then you fast forward to more recent areas that were sort of very deliberately built from nothing cities like Brasilia, Canberra. They're doing that project in Cairo now, building the second capital. And it could not be further from that, right? It's like these grand avenues and giant circles and vistas that look really cool from the air, but they're totally the opposite of what you were showing, these kind of small, dense urban areas. Do you think it is possible? I mean, you gave examples of certain developments and shopping centers and districts, but they're, as a percentage, that's really small for cities. Can we bootstrap that kind of thing from nothing, to be like the majority of what a city is like? So if you think of today, tomorrow, Friday, if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, the people that are going to be occupying this room for the next 3 days, that's like many billions of dollars of net worth. Tell Bitcoiners, where should we be aiming our funds in the future to create that kind of a world? How does that happen?
That's such a good question. I do think it's a long game. It's not going to the problem with all this. The good thing about building disposable architecture, well, I'm glad that some of it's disposable in the sense that it's bad, but a lot of it's going to it's going to be a long time to rebuild. And that's why I'm saying concentrating around areas where, and you can almost have like a little mosaic. Like if you imagine a city, it doesn't have to just be like downtown, right? Maybe it's an interesting shopping center or something like that you can redevelop into a more urban experience that it starts growing outwardly from there. And it really is just a compound thing. And that's once again why you have to build things to last. And I think it's something that can accelerate over time because people will get on board as you start building more. You bolt on another acre to it, another 2 acres to it, it gets stronger. More people want to live there, not just the early adopters. So I think it's a long game. I frankly think in a 100-year timeline, where I'm like, this is easily a 100-year thing that we're talking about. I don't mean we can't be building better now. We absolutely can. But there is so much built already, and there is so much still being built every year. It is an uphill battle. but that's just what it is. But I for some reason, I'm not depressed about that. I'm just more motivated by that.
Yeah. So when I get asked the question like, how do you fix it? The answer is block by block, and that's it. It really is that simple. It's really all you can do, and in my opinion, that's all you should do. Grand sweeping plans are how we got here in the first place. So, try not to, I guess, when I think about it, it's trying to reverse the saying of the same level of thinking that created the problem can't solve the problem. So if it's the centralized planning, then the opposite needs to be done. It's like, well, the most granular bottom up thing you can do is literally just block by block. And that starts with, your backyard, your front yard, and, working with your neighbors. It's building an actual neighborhood, not, suburban hell.
Here. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the modularity I was talking about, but also just free markets. I mean, like the free market has an intelligence that is magnitudes larger than any central planner could dream of, even a brilliant person. So yeah, I think I totally second the humility that I'm hearing. It's just kind of like, let local people do something good for their neighborhood, and gradually that patchwork is going to start becoming more and more cohesive. Another question?
Yeah, awesome panel and discussion tonight. I work in residential construction. I have a background as a tradesman. I was really excited when I saw this come up.
What trade?
What's that?
Which trade?
I actually specialize in waterproof decks, mostly over stick frame, but over concrete as well. So I'll try not to ramble too much because I do that. So I have some notes I just kind of want to go through. I think some of the new density standards we're seeing are great, but I've seen the Fiat games being played in those two old lots in Seattle where I first learned to waterproof, going from one house to 11 houses, and all 11 of those houses needing a waterproof deck replacement in 5 years. I think a lot of that was driven by the incentives of the builders, and they were in that speculative phase of building. And I think building on a Bitcoin standard, you'll have people that are like, whatever, take a little longer. It's only getting cheaper for me, and so hopefully we'll see that. And I love the idea of equity in businesses as an incentive to develop in these neighborhoods. So without rambling too much, my current project is a 1978 house that we stripped to the studs, threw it all in the landfill. Hopefully we're building a 100-year house with modern building technology that we're doing, and the homeowner has that mentality. I'm curious with you, Austin, what are you seeing as far as a merger of old world and new world building technology coming together to create, structures that are going to last hopefully for 100 years or more?
There are some really exciting things in that space, because it's not all about like we're building triple wide or brick masonry, but really I'm an advocate for masonry-based construction systems, and I've actually had change my position a little bit on say concrete block. I was in Spain this summer studying with some people, and there's this guy out of Zurich who's doing some incredible masonry stuff with concrete, and they are creating floor systems. And this doesn't sound like a big deal, but in a high-rise, a 25-story high-rise or something, the floor system takes up a massive amount of the materials cost in carbon in it, that steel and concrete. And he's building completely unreinforced concrete floor systems that save on 80% of the materials, all through strength through geometry. And I don't actually have the pictures. I had it in that presentation where there's these old technologies being discovered, and you do have more and more people talking about durability, talking about mold too. Mold and air quality is a huge deal, and as those things become more apparent, I think more people are going to be looking towards masonry. And I think concrete block and things that a lot of people know how to do can actually be very good systems as long as you don't put steel in them, and there's ways around that. We put GFRP rebar in ours that are non-steel rebar, and so there's a lot of stuff going in that direction, but a lot of it's going to be educating buyers so that they understand that it's better, so they're willing to pay a little bit more. And the concrete block's going to be cheaper than the brick, but it's still going to be more expensive than stick frame, because that's the kind of brilliant thing about stick framing. It's actually a brilliant system for fast and cheap housing, and we actually need fast and cheap housing. Every society needs fast and cheap housing. It's just not all the housing we should have, right? We need durable housing with some fast and cheap housing in between. But there's a guy in MIT, I met a bunch of people from Oxford, from Berkeley, from MIT. I'm not like trying to name drop. I was just there and they were there too. And I was like, oh, people way more important and cooler than me. And they're working on really incredible things. And the MIT guy, he's taken over the design department, and they're doing all these incredible things. I don't know if any of you know who Guastavino is, but he's picking up on this light tile vaulting that really is an incredible building technique that's been lost and is being rediscovered. So I'm really excited.
I wanted to comment on the GC returns and all of that, and that when you're thinking about construction and building, all of these things have been financialized. So when I talk about proximate and ultimate causes, the ultimate cause for a lot of the decisions is, as the evil spreadsheet developer, is the evil spreadsheet, right? It may not be my decision. It may be what my capital partners demand. So, if I don't provide a return as a GC, then I'm not going to be a GC anymore, right? So when you're working in an industry where you're trying to, throw sand in the existing gears and start something new, you have to basically work through those things. So it's not fun, but it's just part of the job.
Another question?
I saw, 15 years ago, these bricks, these concrete blocks that are heavier, but they fit together. And they were some Canadian guy, Azar or something. And you could lay them together, and they would stack, and they wouldn't run around. So it was easy to do. It wasn't the super skill of masonry. And now there's this other thing called eco blocks, and they fit together, and they sort of stay together, and apparently they use some sort of a glue or some sort of a caulking or whatever it's called to glue them together. It seemed to me that would be really cheap and really strong, but it's certainly not bricks, because in bricks, I grew up in a brick house in northeastern city, so I know about that, and they do feel different. So can you tell me about why is that not happening? I heard that the bricklayers or somebody said, well, we won't do that, and they striked, and they caused a huge political problem. Like in California, you weren't allowed to use an electric saw for many years because they said, no, we want to cut them with muscle. So can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, there's a lot of masonry, different types of blocks that are out there that you see in Europe that I think could be amazing systems if they were brought here. It's just hard because construction and stuff is not an industry that likes change. And then you also have the industry here that's really monopolizing things. For example, you're not going to know what this means, but there's a certain size brick that really we need. It's called a modular brick that we build with. Now, we can't even get one in Oklahoma anymore as of a few years ago. Now they're not even making them in Texas. They make them different sizes now that are only for veneer houses. So we get a stick frame and just a veneer house, because all of industry is heading towards facilitating cheap construction. But the opportunity there is for people to actually start these industries, and that's where, when I talk about vertically integrating, that's absolutely part of it. We're going to have to own a brick plant someday, just so we can not only make the kind of bricks we want, that we can start experimenting with bricks we want, and we can create the pipeline for it. Maybe we don't actually do it. Maybe we partner with someone and say, hey, we can buy X amount per year if you'll start producing this. And so we're already talking. He's on the East Coast, but I think there's a lot of possibility there, but I think a lot of it could come from developers and builders almost being like, hey, we're going to do this and we're going to be a buyer, and then facilitating it that way. And once industry realizes they can make money off of it, and then builders realize buyers want it, it doesn't take that much to start a new trend. You know what I mean? It just takes a small group of people, some examples, and then, gosh, a lot can happen from there. But would it be cheaper? I think cheaper than what? Probably not. But in the long run, yes. That's the thing is, in the long run, absolutely, because it's going to last. It's going to not be prone to rot or mold or termites or fire or water in the same way. That's the problem with stick frame. It's a complex system that's also highly vulnerable. And if you're in the building world, it's not like a manufacturing plant, like you're making a car. You're out in the weather and the elements over 12 months, and there's hundreds of people working on it. So I like that masonry is a more forgiving medium, and that it can have mistakes in it and still be highly durable. So I do think it's way cheaper, and it would be cheaper than the triple white brick that we're doing. And so we're kind of starting to think about that, larger masonry units, and then plastering over them, and it's still going to be beautiful.
It's funny, this brick story reminds me that it took me a few years of living in the U.S. to realize how many of these like brick facades are just like ornamental, and like, oh man, like once I realized like this is just veneer, like what? And so like I'd just be offended like so many times. I'd be like, no, look at the shape of like, look at how these bricks like are aligned, like this, you know. It's just kind of, anyway. So yes, it's just one of those things that happens to you at some point as a European living in the U.S. That kind of experience. I'm thinking it's we've been here a while. Shall we like maybe do like the last maybe like 2 questions? How does that sound? Last 2 questions? Yes. Lady in the back.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm going to make this quick. I don't have a question, but I have a personal anecdote to underline how impressive Carlton Landing is. I'm from Oklahoma City, and my family vacations at Carlton Landing now every summer. We just started doing that. It makes so much sense for our family because like we don't have a lot of traditions. We have a big family. We have a lot of different needs, and we live different places. And then there's Carlton Landing. That's a big enough house for us to all get together under one roof for 1 week out of the whole year and be together and have vacation. And there's no other place, especially in Oklahoma, for that to happen. So thank you for choosing Oklahoma to build that. And it makes me proud of Oklahoma. Awesome. I don't have a lot of that pride.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Wow. Another question? Yeah? Maybe we'll also take the one in the back after that, and then we'll wrap up.
I have a statement and a question. Growing up in India around the brick house system 30 years back, my grandfather built this brick house that has seen 5 generations. So when I first came to US, it was kind of a shock to me. My buddy picked me up from the airport, and he said, he built this house. I was like, knocking on that wall. It sounded so hollow to me. I was like, so I was so naive. I asked him, could a thief not break this? So his answer was, call 911 and it'll build in 5 seconds. I was like, okay, dude. So I was wondering, also the bricks back home in India, you can literally break your head. So those are that strong. So when I was building my house here, they got a break, and I touched it. I could literally make them into powder with my 2 hands. So there was so is there a difference in the way they make the bricks? And also, if you have to go back and build that brick and masonry truly strong, how much from a cost perspective that would be to build a, so let's say 2,000 square foot house, and also how difficult it is with the current, government regulations to go build those houses.
I think, let me get your second question first. It's extremely difficult and extremely expensive because for the past 100+ years, we've been prioritizing and, oh my gosh, I really am tired, my vocabulary, increasing the efficiency of stick framing. All of industry has been focused on that, so that's been getting cheaper, while people that know how to do the masonry are getting fewer and fewer and fewer, and the materials are getting harder, and I get these things out of the UK, and I get my rebar out of Canada, and I get my mortar out of Ohio, so it's extremely expensive because it's almost niche, But as you get some scale, we're going to be able to bring that cost down, but it's through doing. It's actually through building that we're able to do that, because if you just talking about it is not going to bring the cost down, so that's why I always talk about doing things. And then the second thing on the brick, you said something about the brick being soft. Is that what you said?
Yeah. So my goal is to, take clay, I think burn them in the fire, and they come out so strong. I've seen some pits doing that back home in some 30 years back. I lost touch with how they're doing it now, but certainly the brick I held in India is very different from what I see around here in US. So I don't know, it's a difference in how they make. It's like, only for aesthetics and nothing more than that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I would say most modern brick that are fired today, you can actually get really quality brick today. And more harder than they were even 100 years ago because they fire them hotter. So there are things like earth blocks and things like that. There are compressed earth, and like maybe it could be something like that. But like the brick that we use is actually close to 6,000 PSI. Concrete, most of the concrete you're walking around on is 3,500 PSI. So the brick are actually harder than concrete. So the brick we're using is definitely, that's definitely not the case. It's a great brick to use, and I think there's a lot of good brick out there. It's more an aesthetic thing. I'm very picky on we make a lot of ugly brick by making kind of like fake looking, trying to make it look old.
By the way, there's a big clay deposit out in Elgin, so maybe at some point some of us are gonna chip in and build a brick factory out there.
Please do it. The Bitcoin brick factory.
Yes.
I'll buy it from you.
Gentleman in the back, last question. If you could just keep it a question because we're running out of time.
What do you think about Citadels or Bitcoiners just descending on a small town and making our own rules?
Perfect last question.
Big fan of Citadels. I plan on building Copper Citadel in Phoenix if anybody wants to join me outside of Texas. I know that's kind of heresy here, but I'll be running off stage. No, that is a viable solution. If you want to, if a group of Bitcoiners wanted to move to a small town, you therefore could grant yourself the authority to control how the zoning works. You can build the town that you want to build. You can build your Citadel. I think that based on some of the trends I talked about earlier, that Citadels are coming sooner than you think. If something like the constitutional case against zoning has legs and continues, then I mean, I wouldn't even begin to imagine how happy I would be, A. And then B, you can literally start with a Citadel in your backyard. So I know Citadels can sometimes be a joke, but those things, don't let your memes be dreams is really what it is.
I think it's awesome because that's what we're doing. Like that project that I shoot, that's exactly how I think about it. Like we're kind of making a statement exactly, Kelly said, block by block. And I might not be thinking about it in the exact same way you guys are, like, because I didn't know about Citadel, the idea of Citadel until today. But
welcome.
Yeah, thanks. I'm properly introduced, but that's how I think. I'm like, we're trying to move there. I'm trying to get my friends to move there. It's like, and what's so cool about these small places, the rules actually don't really come from, say, the federal government. They actually come from city council, almost all of them. And city council is actually, I had no idea how city council worked before getting in this business. It seemed to be like this weird foreign thing and like a big deal. No, you can literally just show up at the city council meetings and talk and protest or whatever. It's actually very easy to push them. And so that's why I think it's so cool, people banding together to start making these arguments. And there's so much information out there, whether it's through strong towns or stuff like that, that you can go well armed, even if you don't like 100% know what you're talking about, And I think that's so exciting. That's really why I have the hope, because it's got to be a ground up kind of like revolution, you could say, of people just going in their backyards and doing something good and contributing something good to the world. And that's how I think we build just the next Florence, I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but like, that's actually my goal. Probably won't, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, but that's actually like what my North Star is.
Yeah, so on the more serious note, you can get involved depending on where you live. There are certain rules and basically the bureaucracy and process is set in a certain way so that if you want to affect change in your local environment, you can do it, okay? It's just that you have to work the process and the system to your benefit. It can be done. It's being done all across the country, and people are banding together on how to do it. Strong Towns is a fantastic resource on how to do that, what arguments to make, and how to make those arguments. So don't think that like we're just going to wait around and hope it happens. No, we're Bitcoiners. We build, we do things, okay? We go to the meetings, we get done what we want to get done. So it's not that the central planning is never going away in that sense. It's that you can actually go and change it because it's at the local level. That's where the authority is granted, and that's where you have the most power to change things.
And can I say one last thing on that? Like, the rules that exist from central plan, the people that now that are enforcing the rules, they're not like the ones that created it and the believers of it. They're just left with the system and they're here's the code book and I'm just enforcing the code. here's what I inherited. I'm just enforcing that. It's not a product of a vision or something like that. So if someone actually comes and presents an actual vision, it can be very compelling.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, having lived here, it's still for a while, it still amazes me how much room there is in Texas. Like this like country is like the same size of France with like a third of the people in it. You know, so there's just so much room, and the economics incentives for Bitcoin mining, like they work differently than historically. Like you always needed to be, you know, by the coast if you build a new place. But nowadays with mining, you can have an economic engine even if you're somewhere out there where you don't have that. So it really opens up the entire world. So I want to end with Kelly's "Don't let your memes be dreams." Thanks all for coming. Thank you so much.